This time on Grief for Breakfast, there is no pause button for life. Grief takes up a lot of time and a lot of space, but you do have things to do. So let's figure out what you can do about it. One of the things that people tell me a lot, like they go to their doctor for a checkup or they go to a therapist to help with their grief, and the therapist or the doctor says, you should give yourself 1 hour a day to feel sad. Like, schedule your sadness, otherwise get back to life. This is ridiculous. You can't schedule your grief into convenient little boxes. It just doesn't work that way. At the same time, you do have things to do. Life keeps going. We don't all have the luxury of making the whole world stop and making your responsibilities stop so that you can let grief take up all the space it needs. That line, grief deserves a lot of space, grief gets to take up all the space it needs. I've used that line. I say that line a lot, and it bumps up against that human reality that when something devastating happens, you still have responsibilities. Not everybody can make the rest of the world stop so that they can give their grief the space it needs to unfold. Let's use a really concrete example. Let's say that your office gives you 3 whole days of bereavement leave when a close family member dies. Sidebar, that is not enough time. Grief is not going to be over in 3 days. It's barely getting started, but that's a different video. So let's say that your employer gave you 3 days for bereavement leave and you are still grieving, spoiler, still grieving, and you need to come in and perform your job. You don't want to suppress or repress or deny your grief, but you do need to put some parameters around it. You do need a box to put it in. In a way, you do need to schedule your grief because you need to get other things done. I think what's important here is that this is a skill. It is a tool in your toolbox to get all therapists around it. Being able to contain your grief so that you can tend to the logistics of living, it needs to be an option in your selection of survival skills, in your toolbox of ways that you manage and deal with your grief. Being able to contain it when it needs to be contained is a really helpful skill. So let's take this apart a little bit. Grief is not this do it right, do it fast, and you're done sort of thing. It is going to have a life of its own. It will take the time that it takes, right? Grief lasts as long as love lasts. It's going to unfold over a much longer period than you think it will. How are you going to manage that on a day-to-day basis when maybe you have kids to take care of, or you have a job to do, or there are other things that need to get done? We have this idea that grief needs to be cleaned up and put in a box and put on the top shelf in the closet as quickly as possible, and that's just not reality. Most people need to find a way to balance the real emotions, the real experience of their grief with external responsibilities and expectations. That's the reality of this world. You can't just shove grief into a corner and be done with it. I mean, it's going to come out sideways. It's going to affect things, even if you try to ignore it. I think what we're going for here is a working relationship with grief. Tools and skills to be able to put that grief away to get through the things that need to be done, but also a way to come back and take that box down off the shelf and engage with it in a way that is honoring your grief, honoring your actual real experience. Like, we are always switching channels, friends. There are ways that you show up to work. Even if you had a crappy morning, you are able to use some skills to turn the volume down on your crappy morning to show up and present at a meeting. We compartmentalize things on a regular basis. Sometimes people call that code switching. The way that you were at home when you had a disagreement with your partner, you put that to the side so that you can show up and present at a meeting. Compartmentalizing different parts of yourself is something that we often do without thinking about it. What grief does is make you be really conscious about how you compartmentalize things. So let's talk about time management inside grief, with that knowledge that we do have responsibilities and jobs and things that need to get done no matter what is going on for us emotionally. So time management inside grief means things like I'm having a really griefy morning. I'm feeling really emotional and really weepy or really angry, and I have these things that need to get done. I am going to do what I can to compartmentalize this. I'm going to spend 5 minutes writing out how this feels, or I'm going to spend 5 minutes meditating so that I can get a little bit more even keeled and ready for the day. And later, maybe after dinner, I am going to come back and revisit this. It is a way of segmenting your day, honestly, in a way, segmenting your grief, doing some time management and putting some time boundaries around how you're feeling. This is really different than on a day-to-day basis saying like, I don't have time for this, I don't want to feel this. Time management inside grief isn't about not feeling things. It is bringing some skill and some management to, this is really valid, this is the reality of how I'm feeling right now, and I don't have time for it. I am going to put it to the side for now, knowing that I will come back and pick myself up after the workday or after the kids are in bed. I will come back and pick myself up, rejoin myself when I have time. Sometimes I think there's some pressure to do your grief right or dedicate a whole bunch of time to it, and that can feel really frustrating. Like, I don't want this to take up my entire life. Again, we come back to those time management tools. Feeling like you need more time for your grief, or you're supposed to take more time for your grief, let's lower those expectations. Let's lower that benchmark for how much time is enough time to grieve, both on a daily basis and over the long term. Am I supposed to spend 15 minutes being actively sad and then for the rest of the day I'm not supposed to feel it? Like, I'm not talking about that. I am talking about, I know that I need half an hour in this day to really check in with myself and how I'm feeling and what I might need. If I don't have the time to do that, the rest of the day doesn't really work very well. How might I structure my time so that I have that 15 minutes to check in with myself? Or that 15 minutes to give myself a good breakfast, because I know that not having enough food in my system makes it really hard for me to regulate my emotions through the day. That is a lot of therapy gobbledygook, but being able to regulate your emotions. Regulating your emotions just means that you're not carried away by them. You are able to recognize what's actually happening and bring some skill to managing it. That's all emotional regulation really means. So time management inside grief on a daily basis is about, what do I need in order to do whatever the responsibilities are for this day? And also paying attention to, hey, my emotional life got kind of the short end of the stick today. How do I know that that's happening? I notice that I am crying in the middle of meetings, or I'm really short-tempered with my neighbors, right? Maybe my grief needs a little bit more room on a day-to-day basis so that my emotions or my emotional state isn't coming out sideways and whacking people I don't intend it to. The last thing that I want to say about time management and grief and putting time boundaries around things is, this is not a race. This is not a race. You do not need to have tied up your grief or processed it or done anything in a specific amount of time. If you didn't have enough time for your grief today, that doesn't make you behind. It makes you human. Whatever your reality is in your day-to-day life, grief is going to be part of that for as long as it is. Coming into relationship with grief includes coming into time relationship with it. How much space does this need today? Do I have that space? If I don't, what do I need to do to make this easier on myself? This is always a conversation between how much time do I need and how much time do I have? That equation is going to change every day, and I think getting into that habit of checking in with yourself and your grief's relationship with time is one of the ways that you survive what you have to survive. Time is a limited resource. Day-to-day time and this lifetime. Time is a limited resource. We can never make enough of it. Bringing some skill and some awareness to how you are spending your time and how those time boundaries are working for you, like, that is where we have some control over time. It's in the choices that we make and how we manage the time that we have. The other thing here is that grief doesn't need 17 hours a day of your time if you don't have 17 hours. 15 minutes of intentionally listening to yourself, being curious about how you're feeling and what you need, like that is a powerful 15 minutes. You don't need to have hours and hours and hours available in order to check in with yourself. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, basically use the time that you have available and make the most of that to listen to yourself.